December 2nd, 2022. It was the week right after Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving that year was on Thursday, the 23rd of November. That weekend for South Georgians is a big hunting weekend. It's deer season. You're going to hear that weekend, Portal Hunting Club, which is located in Riceboro, Georgia, Liberty County, right near McIntosh Line. Down off I-95, Jones Road, that turns into Barrington Ferry. But it's right over there. And you're going to hear that there were hunters out. It's a family weekend. They were all out for deer season. You're going to also hear that Portal Hunting Club is a dog club. That means is that when they hunt, they use dogs to do the hunt. And the dogs run out into the woods, and the deer run, and then the hunters shoot. And you're going to hear that one of those hunters shot a deer. And the dogs that he was using went to retrieve the buck. Dogs just weren't acting right. When he said, "Come back," dogs weren't acting right. So he went to look to figure out what was going on. He did not expect what he found. He found a headless, legless torso, nude, completely nude, with two arms. One almost severed. Her two legs severed. Her head severed. Just off the roadway. And as you can imagine, you will hear him testify. They were shocked, horrified. And I submit to you that the evidence that you will hear is that they returned to the clubhouse to try and get the police, to call somebody to come out. And you're going to hear testimony that that's when the onslaught of law enforcement kicks into high gear. They respond, and they get there by about 5 o'clock, 4:50 p.m. And you're going to hear what the hunting club area looked like. Portal Hunting Club and the area surrounding it, the adjacent territories, there's over 30,000 acres of logging territory. And they hunt on that territory with permission. That looked like a great place to drop a body if you're not from South Georgia, because that's a busy weekend. Logging, hunters, dogs. If you don't know they're there, I submit to you, you're going to hear that that wasn't a great place to leave a body, because they found it quick. Wasn't far off the road, and they found it quick. You're going to hear and see some of the information that law enforcement collected, where the torso was recovered. And you'll see those roadways. They're not asphalt. They're not like regular roadways of the highway, but they're still roadways. And the logging trucks use those. And there are cars that come through, and local citizens will cut through there when the season is going on because the locks are off the gates. And you're going to hear that people were coming and going. Lots of people. And over the next couple of days, you're going to hear what they found. But that very first day, on December 2nd of 2022, the crime scene investigator shows up, and they start documenting the crime scene. And I'm going to submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, counsel's right. I agree about one thing. There are tons of horrible pictures. And I submit to you that we will do our very best to limit what we show you. The state has a burden to prove our case beyond a reasonable doubt. And dismemberment, unfortunately, is what we were dealt. and we have to prove that. So we will present photographs to prove that. But the torso wasn't all that was found on that first day of December 2nd of 2022. Crime scene is going to talk about what they recovered there. And that investigator recovered not just the torso, but the tubs that were used to transport it. And I submit to you, you're going to hear testimony about the blood that was found inside of those tubs, that they tested it on the scene, that they knew it was first blood and then that it was human blood next, because they can test for that. And they're going to tell you also about the knife. Counsel talked to you a lot about what wasn't shown. But I submit to you, you all assured us, and I'm going to ask you to use your common sense as much as possible. You're going to hear about that knife. A Milwaukee, orange-handled, black-sheathed knife. And that knife, ladies and gentlemen, had a cleansing wipe wrapped around it. Call it what you will. Clorox wipes, things you use to clean up. Those wipes were everywhere. There were lots of them that were recovered. Because the killer didn't want to leave behind evidence. I submit to you that killer was a prosecutor. I submit to you that the evidence is going to show that he would have known to clean up. And I submit to you that there's more evidence. That knife was purchased, I submit, the evidence will show, by Nicholas James Kassotis. If you look at that picture, the state will introduce it, you can see that knife tucked under his arm. That's him on surveillance from Home Depot. And I submit to you that in case you were unsure that that was him, that's the receipt. Showing, if you look closely, that's his name, Nicholas James Kassotis. So I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, there's no question that the evidence will show that Nicholas James Kassotis purchased that knife. And if you look at that, he bought it at 8:56 a.m. on the morning that you will ultimately hear was the day her body was dumped. The same day, hours after. And you will hear evidence of exactly how we know that. You'll see the tubs. They will be here in this courtroom. You will hear about the DNA analyst testing the substances inside of those tubs and that it was Mindi's blood in those tubs. They didn't know who she was then. They just knew there was an unidentified torso. Those tubs also get bought at Home Depot. And you're going to hear how detectives from the Liberty County Sheriff's Office and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation ran down every lead they could. And in the beginning of this case, you're going to hear that there wasn't a lot to work with. You're going to hear they found a torso with no head and no legs. And that was all they had. That, the knife, and the tubs. So you're going to hear how they started with the knife and the tubs. And then it gets worse. Because while hunters are still out hunting, we find more pieces. Over a 3-mile radius, pieces are dumped with no regard, I submit to you, will be the evidence. Tossed into the woods. The heavier piece, right by the edge of the road. But her legs, they're brought farther out in the woods. Second tub is recovered. I submit to you that was used to carry her leg. You're also going to hear how her head was ultimately recovered. First leg found by a hunter, separate hunter than the first crew. I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear about all of the victims in this case, because although Mindi suffered the most tragic loss No question. Every person this case touches suffered. You're going to hear there's a second hunter that finds the first leg. And then you're going to hear that they do a canine search. They deploy the dogs, cadaver dogs, to try and find the rest of her. That their job was to try and find this whole person to lay her to rest. You're going to hear that a canine recovered, with his handler, of course, the second leg. And I'm not going to show it right now, but you're going to hear how they collected maggots, fly larvae, from that leg to determine when these pieces were dumped. You're going to hear from the doctor. I call him the bug doctor. He's an entomologist, not that fancy. He's going to tell you when those bugs could have been exposed to her body and how that helped law enforcement to narrow down when she got there. That's the second tub. That was found next to the leg. And you're going to see where each of these pieces was recovered. I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear that they were recovered exactly where Nicholas James Kassotis' vehicle was tracked. You're also going to hear him admit that he was there. And I submit to you, you're going to hear him admit it once he realizes law enforcement can track his car. The head, unfortunately, wasn't found until 5 days later. Buried. That's the shovel. And I submit to you, you're going to see the pictures that show that a shovel was used, because you're going to see that there are roots that are disturbed, where a shovel hit roots and a new spot was picked, and her head was buried. And you're going to hear about how by some miracle that head was found. By some disturbed dirt by the roadway. And then you're going to hear and see Mr. Kassotis buying a shovel, November 4th of 2022. From Home Depot, just by his house in Savannah. Counsel had you believe it's circumstantial, you're not going to see anything, but I submit to you, your common sense is going to easily dictate what the evidence shows. An autopsy is conducted. 2 days, because we didn't know if the head was going to be recovered. That's what you're going to hear the officers testify to. And Dr. Lehman, our medical examiner, is going to explain that. He started the autopsy on the torso and the 2 legs. He took what's called blood stain cards so that he could send the DNA to the laboratory to determine, is this the same person? We made sure we had the same person first. And on the 9th, he continued the autopsy because the head was recovered. And he's going to tell you there were 9 traumatic wounds to her skull. She was beaten on the head. You will see it. Those didn't go away. One of them resulting in a small fracture. I submit to you, you're also going to see her abdominal wounds. And you're going to hear why. The state is going to present to you a reason why there were wounds to her abdomen as well. And unfortunately, you're going to hear about the dismemberment. You're going to hear from the doctor. He can't rule out certain things. And I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear the reason he can't. is because of the defendant. I submit to you, he can't rule out, for example, asphyxia, choking, because her neck is missing. Parts of her body have been so damaged that he can't do anything about that. That's what you're going to hear. He won't guess. You will not hear any guessing from the state. You will hear facts. And I submit to you, those facts will be compelling. Who is she? That was the next step, right? Who is she? How do we figure out that it's Mindi? Now, I've called her Mindi, but the detectives and law enforcement, they didn't know yet. They're going to talk to you about what they did at the time. They tried to test her fingerprints at the scene. They had her hands. They weren't on record. You're going to hear that they went ahead and they checked after the autopsy. She had actually on the right side a dental implant, like a crown. They couldn't track that, but they tried. You're going to hear that they did her DNA. They're going to hear that it wasn't in the system. And they went to genetic genealogy. God bless our country. Technology gets better and better. And they were able to get leads to figure out who she might be related to try and figure out who this woman was. And you're going to hear that the lead that they got dealing with the FBI was for who might be her mother, Betsy Mebane. And Betsy Mebane, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear they did her buccal swabs. It's like a Q-tip, those cotton swabs that they put inside your mouth, and they collected mom's DNA. And it turned out that was her mother. 99.9999% statistically. That is Mindi. You're going to hear about the forensic sketches that came out, that they tried to find information, and the hundreds of leads that law enforcement ran down. You're going to hear about all of the work that everyone put in to try and figure out who is this woman. All while they were trying to run down the knife and the tubs because that's all they had at the scene at the time. Remember I told you the doctor, the entomologist, he will estimate the dates of exposure between a window. And he gives a window, and he'll explain to you why there's a window of the 27th through the 29th. And the mean, or the median, right in the middle, is the 28th. But it could be a little bit before or a little bit after, because he's going to tell you how he did DNA on the fly larvae to figure out how far along they were in their life cycle, so he could know exactly when her body was dumped there. But that in of itself isn't all you're going to have. Now that we know it's Mindi Mebane Kassotis, you're going to hear that law enforcement went and talked to the people that last saw her alive to, again, keep closing in that window, right? And you're going to hear that she was at her house with the defendant at the time in Savannah. Her parents had gone away for Thanksgiving weekend. Her dad's going to tell you that he saw her a couple of days before they left. They went up to Hilton Head with their youngest son, and that they were not at the house that weekend. The four of them, you're going to hear, lived together. Mindi, Mr. Kassotis, her mother, and her father. And that her mom and dad went away knowing that Mindi wasn't feeling well, that she was on bed rest from being 8 months pregnant. That's what her parents thought. In fact, you're going to hear that they thought that January was her due date. And that she didn't go because she was going to stay home. She didn't feel well. And you're going to also hear them tell you that they were very glad to hear when Mr. Kassotis advised them that Mindi was in the hospital, because they thought, great, she's going to get treatment. They're going to take care of her. We're not worried. So they weren't surprised when they came home and they didn't see Mindi. And you're going to hear one of the most compelling things. Her dad had hip surgery November 30th of 2022 when he came back from Hilton Head. And when he came back, he went into the hospital, St. Joseph Candler, near the house. It was an overnight stay. And on December 1st, when he came back, Mr. Kassotis helped him into the house with his wife. It's a couple of steps to walk in, and he had just had hip surgery. And you're going to hear Mr. Kassotis told her parents, "Don't worry, I'll take care of Mr. Mebane. Go back to work. Mrs. Mebane, go back to work. I'll watch him." And while they're in the house together, he says to her father, "I'm going to get Mindi." She's dead. "I'm going to get Mindi" is what you will hear, but she's dead. And he knew that. And I'll tell you why. The evidence is going to show that they were at this house in Savannah, and that in the house in Savannah, there's blood in the house, and it's Mindi's blood. And you're going to note, notably, you're going to see the photographs, that blood is right where her head would be on the futon. You're going to hear about blood specks on the wall, that they needed to use blue star, a luminescent, to find, because it had been cleaned up. You're going to hear, we don't know whether she died there. But there was definitely a bloodletting event there. And the only person with access was Nicholas James Kassotis. So we follow his car, because now we know it's the 29th, 27th through the 29th. And what we find, his car is a green Ford Explorer. And if you see at the top of that frame, there's a City of Riceboro building, and that building has a camera. And that camera captures a green Ford Explorer driving past it November 29th. I submit to you the evidence will show that that's the same day, if you recall, he bought that knife that was found on the crime scene. 8:56 in the morning. You're going to see his car, I submit to you, drive right past it. And I'm going to submit to you that the evidence that you're going to see that tells you why we know it's his car is that car has Bluetooth. When you buy a new car and your phone can sync so you can talk on your phone, lots of those new cars do that. AT&T keeps those records. Not the Jim McIntyres, but AT&T. I'm going to submit to you an independent third party, no interest in this case. And those records are going to show his car ping from his house to Home Depot and his whole drive right down 95 to Riceboro, right across into where he dumps the body. And he's going to admit on the audio statements to law enforcement post Miranda, an attorney who waived his rights, he told them, "I turned off my GPS." And you're going to hear the surprise in his voice when he learns they can track his car too. You're going to hear that the car and the phone follow the same path. You're going to see that witness from Riceboro, and you're going to see those photographs. And there they are. You're going to see his Ford Explorer drive right past it. You're going to see the Georgia records that show it's his car. You're going to see the car records that show he bought that car with cash. Almost $46,000 of cash that he claims Mr. McIntyre was running all of his money, and he had no money. That's what you're going to hear. And we're going to tell you where he had money from. You're going to see the car come, and you're going to see the car go. And I told you, we followed the phones. That's why I said December 1st. When he tells her parents he's going to the hospital to pick her up, she's already dead. Because he put her there. You're going to hear why everybody believed Mr. Kassotis. Counsel just told you all these wonderful things about his client. Decorated military veteran, prosecutor, Judge Advocate General with the Navy, Pentagon, Boston, 2 law degrees. It's not just her family that believed him. Everybody believed him. On paper, he looked like Prince Charming. I submit to you that's what the evidence will show. And then you're going to hear the statements from the defendant. And I submit to you, you should listen to them very carefully. There's a lot of information in there. And it's information that law enforcement was able to run down. It's not just lies, it's things that are impossible, I submit to you. The question becomes why, right? Mr. Weinstein talked a little bit about the divorce. And I'm going to submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that after 10 years as a decorated military veteran, Mr. Kassotis just leaves the Navy. But he leaves because he owes his first wife $1,500,000+, and the Navy is going to make him pay it. I submit to you that that divorce you're going to hear about, and you're going to hear about it from the understanding of why him and Mindi were on the run. I submit to you, Mindi will be afraid. I submit to you, he fooled her too. I submit the evidence is going to show that her close family and friends are going to tell you that she was afraid. She bought it, and she paid for that with her life. I submit to you, you're going to hear that there was a new woman, that Mr. Kassotis, before he even had this death, was already moved on. He started talking to a new woman. She didn't know. You're going to hear she did not know he had a wife. She was not from here. She was not in any way aware of what was going on. And that he tricked her too. And you're going to hear that he was running as quick as he could away from Georgia. You're going to hear that they got remarried. She was found on December 2nd, that he was already engaged by February, and that he was already married again by April. That he changed his name several times in multiple states. I submit to you, he didn't want to pay that money. That's what you're going to hear. And you're going to hear how he tried to seal off the loose ends. Changing his name, he burned the car. I submit to you, that's what the evidence will show. To the ground. March, brand new Ford Explorer. That's what the evidence is going to show. So let's talk for just a moment about the charges. You're going to hear that the state has charged the defendant, and you're going to listen to the court. So anything I say about the law, if there's any discrepancy, you follow Judge Rose. Malice murder, intent to kill. Every blow is an intent to kill when you're striking somebody in the head. Do we know if that killed her? No, we don't. But we know that all of those contributed to her death, and you're going to hear that from the pathologist, medical doctor. You're going to also hear felony murder, which is aggravated assault, where you intend to cause harm, serious bodily injury, but it ultimately kills them. So even if you don't think for a moment that at each blow it was intent to kill, felony murder is if I intended to assault, then they die, it's felony murder. And you're going to hear something about venue, where she was killed. Counsel pointed out quite a bit about what the state doesn't know. We don't. And the law in the state of Georgia, and you're going to listen to Judge Rose, specifically instructs on venue. It talks about either the county in which the cause of death was inflicted, which in this case, you're going to hear everyone say they don't know exactly when she took her last breath. because her body was dismembered and tossed over 3 miles. But they also, under the law, it says, if a dead body is discovered in this state and it cannot be readily determined in what county the cause of death was inflicted, it shall be considered that the cause of death was inflicted in the county in which the dead body was discovered. The law anticipates cases like this. And I submit to you, that's what we have. Mindy's body was in liberty. That's why we are here. You're also going to hear about concealing the death of another, trying to hide the death itself. You're going to hear about the possession of the knife, and you're going to hear about more than one knife, the deer processing kit and the knife itself, that Milwaukee knife. And I submit to you, you have to get through the flesh to get to the bones. And you're going to hear the tool mark expert explain, you can't do tool marks on flesh. You're going to hear about possession of tools for the commission of the crime. Those would be the Ford Explorer itself for transporting the body, the insulation knife to get access to the bones, the deer processing kit to potentially cut through the bones, and the tubs that were used to transport her, the shovel that was used to bury her head and partially one of her legs, and the removal of body parts. Because they got moved all over. You're going to see them all over that map. And then the tampering, those cleansing wipes, trying to get rid of biological evidence. I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, a prosecutor would know that. I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, to bring your common sense. Follow the law and give justice to Mindi Mebane. Thank you.